Hi everyone, welcome to our first roundtable of 2023 with Animal Behavior Live. This first roundtable will be the first of a series of roundtables on inclusivity in academia, and that will happen every 3 months. So this roundtable will focus on the role that ethnicity plays in academia. AB and I are the members of the organizing committee for Animal Behavior Live, and Samadhi will be the chairperson for this roundtable. I can briefly introduce myself. So I identify as white. I'm a postdoc at the University of Sussex. I study bee behavior, and yeah, that's it.
I'm AB. I'm from India, but I'm currently doing a postdoc in Switzerland, and I'm working on the behavior of ants. I guess we can now start, and somebody can take over.
Hello everyone, I'm Samadhi. My surname is pronounced Galpayage. I'm a PhD student at Queen Mary University of London, studying behavior of bees. And I've been based in the UK since I was 14. I was born and brought up in Italy, and my parents are from Sri Lanka. So that's my background. So I'd like to welcome our panel members today. We have Charlene, Udita, and Amos. So maybe in the order that I just said, if you could introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about you and what you do.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Charlene. I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I'm now living in the US for the past 3 years. I'm a postdoc at the Cuchibotla lab, and I'm studying mouse behavior and learning processes. And I previously did my PhD in Germany. I identify as from the Latino Hispanic ethnicity.
Hi everyone, thanks for this wonderful opportunity. I'm Udita Bansal. I'm originally from India, born and brought up there, did my undergraduate education there as well. And currently I'm based out of US in my second year of PhD at the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Cornell University. And previously I did my master's from London. So I have lived in different places, and currently I'm interested in studying how sleep ecology affects body color evolution, specifically in reptiles. And I identify myself as South Asian.
Hi everyone, I'm Waseni Agaba Amos. I'm a Nigerian. Currently, I base and study in Nigeria, Ahmadu Bello University. I'm into neuroscience, and I'm a postgraduate student of human anatomy. I identify as Black and African from a third world country.
Thank you so much. So today's session is on the role that ethnicity plays in academia. And so we'd like to focus on a couple of big questions, which are, how does ethnicity impact prospects of an academic career? And what can be done to make academia more inclusive? And so the first question, I think we can maybe break down into perhaps the barriers when entering academia, and then we can talk about, once you enter academia, then what barriers there are. So yeah, you can pick. I'd like to start.
Should we? I'm just gonna follow the introduction order. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting. Those are very interesting questions. And as I mentioned before, I first was born and raised in Mexico, then moved to Germany to do my PhD, and I faced the first challenge when moving to Germany was to sort of reassess my identity when I was in a different context, right? Because in Mexico City, as than any other Mexican person, I didn't face that challenge. And interestingly, also moving to the US, this reassessment happened again in a different way, because the way people see me here in the US as a Mexican is completely different from the way people see me in Germany as a Mexican. So I think the first challenge is sort of kind of learning to navigate these different environments and different contexts you move in, because academia has the advantage and sort of the necessity of you to move to different places or try out different contexts. And, you know, the lab environment is like a little family. So as a person from an underrepresented background in science, you have to learn how to navigate this environment. And it's sort of also learning how other people think of you because you come from a different place, or because there's this like biases that people have. So you have to learn that and also try to fit while not losing your identity. So something that I wanted actually to bring up is that I actually have a very unusual Mexican name, and people have told me that. So I typically, when I started publishing and everything, there was this decision of just using only my first last name. So typically people from Hispanic backgrounds have two last names, that one that belongs to the dad and one from the mother. So since I have this unusual name, my thought process at the point where I was doing my PhD was like, well, I'm going to take advantage of having this unusual English sounding name to sort of hide my other last name and make sure that there are no biases when I'm trying to publish, to try to help myself, you know, because I heard and I knew that a lot of people with hyphened last names had this issue. And sort of now that I'm in this stage of my life and as a postdoc, and I also like grown up as a person, I regret it because it's I don't know what benefit has brought me, and it shouldn't be like this. So this is just like a short commentary on that. And yeah, I'm just gonna shut up now.
Thanks for bringing that up, Charlene. Like, I do agree with most of that, because I've also gone through similar experiences of moving across continents and re-identifying myself in those new contexts. And coming from India, there's always this bias of English not being my native language, even though my entire education was the medium of instruction was English. So of course there are those biases that make you feel somewhat inferior to the others, but time and again you have to remind yourself that that is not the case. But talking about barriers to just entering academia, another thing that is related to languages, of course, the English proficiency exams that people from non-native English-speaking countries have to give to study in any university abroad. And what I find bizarre is that these scores kind of expire in 2 years. So these exams are really expensive in the first place. And once you've proven your proficiency, you have to kind of again prove it in 2 years if you're applying to another place. So I think there are barriers to already minoritized ethnicities which don't necessarily speak English as their first language. But even within those communities, there is then segregation in who can access these resources, because not everyone can afford to pay for these proficiency exams. So within these ethnicities, there is further segregation in who's able to do science. So that's something I strongly feel about, especially at the academia entering stage. And of course, once you've entered, there are cultural differences, and sometimes you can feel isolated, and those issues can take up a lot of your time just because you have to tackle them yourself. and that can divert time from more productive activities such as your research work or teaching and stuff like that. But that's what I feel at this point.
Thank you. Can I ask a quick question in terms of the exams? Is that when you're an undergraduate, like applying for an undergraduate degree? Or is that like a PhD level as well?
It's at the PhD level, master's level, and I think, if I'm not wrong, also at the undergraduate level, although I did my undergraduate from India, so I'm not sure if that's the case. But it's definitely prevalent at all the other stages as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, over here in Nigeria, studying here, language isn't a barrier because the official language that has been adopted is English language. But the challenge we have before getting into an academic career is gaining entry into the higher level education. It's so difficult. And you see thousands of people applying, no enough schools to take them in. And they end up spending years after years reapplying without gaining entry. That's a very, very huge challenge. And as well, even from the primary education, the ethnic groups, they are predominantly known with an occupation. And some of those ethnic groups, they isolate themselves. They want the children to learn their trade before even furthering into primary school, secondary level, and they find it difficult to learn and even gain entry into the higher education system. It's a very, very big challenge over here in Nigeria.
Sorry.
For that. Yeah.
If I can ask a question. Do you think the gates of higher level education are closed or like partially closed because of competition, or what's the reason behind?
Yes, competition is one thing, and enough of those schools is another thing. If there are enough schools, it will reduce the competition. But since there are not enough schools to take the students in, the competition is so high in the school that have their doors open, and one end up not having admission. And let's not talk about the corrupt system over here in Nigeria. It's for another day. But you see brilliant students staying at home, not gaining entry into the higher education, while those who probably are dull in quotes gain admission since they have someone who can give them that.
Well, thank you very much for sharing, but I'm burning to ask, how did you manage to get into academia then?
Even though there is competition, we still go to school. It might be luck, and it could be your own efforts. Majority are down to your own efforts. You have a good grade, you gain admission. But sometimes you need a little touch of luck to gain entrance into a higher academic level.
I think Amos also brought up a very good point about access to education and resources in general. And that varies at every different level in academia, from just from my own experience of having studied at medium level university in India, and comparing that with the undergraduate education that US provides. I feel like I could have done so much more if I was in a system like this. So there's always the difference in resources, and when everyone's starting at a certain place, they don't generally have to be on the at an equal footing, because everyone's coming from very different backgrounds, and that can be a huge barrier to certain ethnicities, and can lead to a lot of struggle in the initial phases, just because of the differences and the resources they've been provided previously.
if I can add to my own point, parental influence as well affects academy. Some ethnic groups over here, they have a predominant occupation. Let's say, for instance, law. You see everyone from that ethnic group wanting to study law, and the parental influence want their children to study law as well. So they change the paths of their children's career, their passion and all that. It's also a challenge over here.
Yeah, this last point is interesting because I've read a little bit of papers about ethnicity in academia before organizing this roundtable, and this was one of the factors that the market is close to people coming from some ethnicities, but also due to racial discrimination, some ethnicity will choose some paths that they know are like seen as more prestigious, let's say. Like law is part of it, for instance, or high level education is part of it as well. Is that something that you experienced yourself?
Yeah, personally, I've experienced that with my dad wanting me to study medicine, becoming a doctor. So I had to reorient myself into a scientific class in order to gain access to medical schools. So it has happened to me, really.
Can I ask a question, Amos? So is that prestige merely related to how much you would get paid in different professions, or what is the determining factor?
Yeah, aside from prestige, like Natasha said, also they see it as a prospective career where you get paid and have a good source of living. You don't need to look for a job. You don't need to go for a job hunt. So all that contributes to why parents ask children to go into some certain kind of career.
That's also the case in a lot of the Indian population, I suppose, because science in general is very low pay in India. So it's kind of only for the majority of the scientists in India would be from the upper caste then. And people who are able to pursue science would have the privilege of coming from families who can afford to not have kids who are not earning too well, such as in fields of engineering or medicine. So that's also another issue.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and I mean, a lot of these issues are intersectional, right? So the socioeconomic class factor plus the ethnicity factor really plays a role. And here in the US also, there have been studies that show that a huge percentage of faculty in professor positions come from families that at least any of the parents has a PhD. So that already creates a bias towards basically sort of an inherited advantage to science. But also the fact that science is considered as a kind of low-paying job. This is something that I still find interesting because we spend most of our years studying and we develop all these set of skills for it to be considered as not as good as being a lawyer or being a doctor, right? So one of the important factors to recruit people into science, so that's very important, but also to keep people in science. And the retention, I think for the retention factor, having a job as a researcher with a good pay that you don't have to worry about bringing up a family or anything else. I think that's a very important factor. And now universities are starting to increase salaries. but it's still really, there's a huge gap on that area. So I think to retain people that have gone into science and like are doing a postdoc or thinking on applying to a professorship, there needs to be a competitive market also in the academic aspect.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to ethnicity in academia, I feel like there are sort of at least two ways in which you experience this. One is if you're an ethnic minority in, let's say, most likely a Western country, so like in Europe or the States, and then maybe if you're from your parent, if you're from your parents' country, then the experience is quite different maybe. For me, it's always been, well, I was born in Italy, but my parents are from Sri Lanka, so there was always this cultural, let's call it clash, both like in school and in my private life. And then that sort of carries on. And then I was an immigrant myself coming to the UK. So there's like another added like different cultural environment. And then just like going back to people choosing certain paths, and like from my personal experience, I did my undergrad in Bristol and I studied biology, and probably 98% of the people everyone was just white. And then there were only 2 or 3 people of color and maybe 1 or 2 international students. And then as soon as I entered the engineering library or the medicine library, then you start to see a lot more diversity. So I think that goes to show what career paths people choose. And being at, let's say, Queen Mary University of London, if you look at the undergrad population, it's super diverse. Whereas when you move up and then you become a PhD student, you go to conferences and you look at postdocs and you look at lecturers, then there is a massive gap between the people at like earlier career stages and then the later career stages. And I think that does also make a difference in terms of your role models, who you can relate to, who you can even go to just to talk about these things and share your experience. And so, yeah, since I'm here, I like to really thank Animal Behavior Live for doing this sort of thing, because it gives us a platform to discuss these things, for people not to feel alone, for people to ask questions, and hopefully to improve the situation. So I think we mostly focus on the barriers entering academia, and I think most of us are quite junior scientists, but maybe we can talk about, do you have any worries in terms of going forward? So we already talked about the name. I have the name issue as well. Here it says Samadhi Galpaige. My surname is actually Galpaige Dana, and often people think only Dana is my surname, and it's not. And Hirun is my first name, but I go by my middle name, Samadhi. So I also had this like, oh, what do? I don't want to betray myself. This is my name. This is my identity. And so I personally went with my full name on papers, but for like media and like this sort of public engagement stuff, I go with Samadhi Galpaige, which is my like everyday shortened version.
Can I ask, why do you feel the need to shorten it in your everyday life?
It just gets confusing to people. It's just like, well, by convention in the West, well, at least in the UK, you have your name first and then your surname. And so I would be referred to as Hirani, but I'm Samadhi, so then it's just easier to have Samadhi. And Galpayag is the main component of my surname, like Don on its own doesn't really make sense. So then that's the main part of my full name. And that's how I identify as.
And do you feel like it's a load for you? Because what I'm hearing when you say this is that you're trying to fit the Western model so that you don't, like, how do you put? You're trying to ease the way for us Western people to integrate you in a sense.
Yeah, so I think at some point, it's not only for like the Western people's convenience, it's also for my convenience, because every time it's like, oh, here we go again. It's like, okay, let's just make it simple for myself as well. And I think only people from Sri Lanka would know these are my first names and this is my surname, because they know what names and surnames sound like in Sri Lanka. So I have to find some kind of practical solution, right? So this is what I've gone with. But because in papers, I use my full name, then I still feel true to myself to some extent.
As a member of the panel here, do you relate to this? I guess to some extent you do.
Yes, I do, but in a very different way. Over here, due to inter-ethnic crisis, we find it difficult to identify as a particular ethnic group. You find it difficult to identify yourself as one of them, because you don't know if probably your colleagues or your students are from the rival ethnic groups. So you just want to keep it to yourself. So you don't identify as belonging to a specific ethnic group. It happens here a lot.
I think along the lines of, sorry, go on.
I just wanted to say it's funny because I read this paper of Kueli Dutch. She's an expert in diversity. She was supposed to be in the roundtable, but she couldn't make it eventually. But she was saying that actually racialized people, they do feel strongly about their ethnicity as an identity. It's only white people who don't see it as important, because they, at least in Western countries, they are the norm. So they don't have to be confronted to their ethnicity because that's the norm, that's a privilege. But Amos, what you're saying is completely different here, because you're not living in Western countries. So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, and also, so for me, it was very interesting when I moved to the US. This was the first time I got asked what was my race. And I had no idea what to write down, because there's the separation between race and ethnicity. So I could put Latina as ethnicity, but I didn't know what to put for race. So it's interesting how people have to just redefine themselves when they need to fit into a different context, where the rules or the categories in which you put people in are completely different from what you experienced in your life.
And just to add to that, I feel like coming from India, I felt like, yeah, the Western world often feels more perfect to us. But when you come here and you realize there are different ethnicities and races within the country as well, and there are issues. Like, for example, in India, we face the caste system, and there's socioeconomic differences there. But in the US, there's redlining, which is basically a historical process where marginalized communities with lower socioeconomic status and mostly Black people have been put in neighborhoods where investment is seen as like a risky thing. And so resources are not really available to those communities. And their lives are so different from the white people here. So it's just, there are differences within different regions where we might have thought things are more uniform.
Going back to what Natasha was saying on how if you are a minority, underrepresented, especially if you're a person of color, those aspects play a big role in how you see yourself, and it's part of your identity. I just wanted to say, just like share some personal experiences where being a person of color and a minority is something I've always like felt, because I grew up hearing, oh, you're an outsider, you're different, blah, blah, blah. And so even when I'm in a space, for example, in the UK, people don't explicitly say this kind of thing, but the moment I do enter a conference, I am self-conscious, I am aware of it. And I want to share a story where we were at a meeting, like a mini small conference in another European country. And there was an episode where someone said something a bit insensitive to another person of color. And I got really angry. And that person responded, oh, it's okay. And I was like, no, it's not okay. And so I tried to explain to the person that made the comment. And my colleagues from here were sort of like frozen and didn't know what to do. And I felt really alone in that moment. I mean, my colleagues were not people of color, and I felt like, am I acting crazy here? But I knew that it was right for me to react and explain to that person that what they said was wrong. And only after sort of like processing this like experience of racism, learning more about what like terminologies, like what micro racism is and stuff like that, then I realized that okay, that was wrong and I did the right thing to speak up. And also the more I shared my experiences and had a discussion with my colleagues as well, then the more of an understanding there was. So the next time something happened to me where I felt discriminated, my colleague was able to understand that and kind of, let's say, well, support me in that moment. Even though in my head, I was like, I didn't say anything. And I was thinking, no, maybe it's just in my head. This wasn't a racist experience. But then when my colleague spoke up to me and asked me, are you okay? Like, that was weird. Like, that must have been racist. And I felt a bit better. So I think it's important to have these conversations with your colleagues and explain. And yeah, even if people haven't gone through it or haven't experienced it, then it's nice to have that support.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Samadhi. I guess this touches upon the notion of racial cognitive load, when as a people of color, you have the cognitive load of always thinking of accommodating the norm, so white people, so not to pass as a crazy person at a conference because you snap because the person has told something very insensitive, for instance. Like you have you have to think about every possible outcome of the situation, basically. When you were saying that you did went for this guy because, or I don't know if it was a guy, just this person, you were thinking, well, maybe I'm looking as a crazy person. Yeah, you have this double thinking at the same time, which is very like draining energetically speaking, because you have to think of all the different outcomes in this situation. Yeah, do other people relate to this experience?
Yeah, I personally relate to that a lot. I feel it as kind of different ghosts always taking space of your like daily thinking. You have to think about like if you come from like a lower economic class, like for example with my family, you have to thinking about using part of your salary to support your family. You have to be thinking about how to navigate these environments. If you receive a microaggression, it's like, was it really a microaggression? Was it not? How do I deal with this? Do I, as Samadhi was saying, right? So it's just a lot of things that are on your mind of the everyday that I feel it like subtracts from what you could be doing in terms of research or thinking out projects, or just having the mental space to focus on other things. So I absolutely agree with that feeling, and the fact that we are having slowly a more increasingly more diverse environments in science. I think it will help. Hopefully, it will help at some point for people to understand where others are coming from and what are why are other people more preoccupied about other things, and probably reach more understanding and more empathy with a broader range of people.
Yeah, I have also felt like that at times, and it's not just in terms of direct confrontations, but also it could be due to cultural differences leading to certain situations where you feel like you don't know if you've done something that might not be culturally fitting into another person's experience, and then you face sort of a microaggression, but you're not sure what went wrong and on which side. So it can be really draining to think of yourself as being the wrong person. It kind of comes automatically because you're the ethnic minority. So and it's really hard to reach out to someone to ask if you were wrong, or if someone else was wrong in that position, what can be done about it. So it gets really draining, like Charlotte said, yeah, and takes up a lot of time for sure.
Yeah, so exactly, what can we do about it? How do you know when you have been discriminated against? Do you have some ideas?
So I think we all know it, but at least in my personal experience, when you face it, you know it. But part of you wants to like think that that was not the case, that that was not the reason, and try to find an explanation. So at least that's how I operate, is like try to find another explanation that is not related to the fact that I'm Mexican for that behavior. But in my experience, when it happens, and you know it, and you just like are thinking about it because you want to find probable better reasons for that behavior.
I think it can be really difficult to always stand up to those people, like in every situation, depending on hierarchy and different things. but something that we can all do, of course. And I'm sure after facing all this, we're more aware of what others might be going through. So checking our own biases at all times, even though we feel like we might be in an ethnic minority, people's experiences can be really different coming from different groups. So just acknowledging that and being more careful in our own actions is something that we can do to make academia more inclusive.
So maybe I can just touch on a point here that sort of links the two in some sense. To me, I did my PhD in India, and as I was going through the different stages, one concern was always so the animal behavior field in India is not too large. So there's like maybe 30 labs that are well known and connect with each other and stuff. And so it always was in some sense, and especially in social insight, when I was always looking to go to conferences and stuff where I can meet people and interact and expand my network, because to me that was the only way you could advance in the field, right? But then when you reach these conferences, I mean, of course there are barriers in terms of financial resources, getting visas and stuff before you reach there. But even after you crossed all that and then you reach there, and then you see that mostly in all the conferences that I've been to, the certain cliques that form, right? And these are almost always associated with where you're from. So every time I've been to one, the rest of us who are from India, we would group together, and in some sense, it was a way to, I don't know, maybe that's too strong a word, but to protect ourselves. You're in a new place, you don't know anyone, you haven't met any of these people, you don't know how to interact, and I guess so recently it's been shifting a little bit. I've become more confident in putting myself out there, meeting new people, and expanding my network. But what strikes me is that it took me a long time to reach that stage, and a lot of effort from my own side, and not many infrastructural support, from the organizers of the conference or something. And then I see maybe people at a similar career stage from one of the developing countries, white male, and then they are like, they just go, they go and they interact and they meet and I'm like, this is so easy. Why is it so not so easy? And for me, that acts as a strong barrier, because this is the way then you get a postdoc, or you get opportunities that come up next, and or you are able to form collaborations and start new projects and stuff. And if this acts as a it acts as a strong limiting factor in some sense to increase diversity, I feel. And this is also one of the reasons why I joined ABL to help organize the conference, because I feel that online conferences can help deal with a lot of those inequalities simply because of the anonymity, or some level of anonymity that is offered by just being a name on a messaging chat or something, right? You don't know the face, you don't know the color, and you just talk.
I think Evie brings up two very important points. One is probably like the grouping of certain ethnicities, and that happens not just at conferences, but I think also at other levels if you're studying. And I think it's one major reason for that would also be a sense of belonging. So when you're already feeling isolated as an ethnic minority, having people who can relate to your struggles can be a really strong support system. So, but yeah, the effort should be from both sides to increase that sense of belonging. And I think, at least in certain places, those steps are being taken now. And the other point you brought up about the barriers to attending a conference, financial and visa, and that's a big thing. And that leads to further inaccess for ethnic minorities to resources that we're already not provided with, but we're trying to reach to those resources, but then it's really difficult for us to do that. And one solution to that, of course, is conducting conferences in countries where there are fewer visa restrictions. And for example, conducting a conference in India would also be mean that people from the US can travel to India, and it's a cheaper trip for them compared to an Indian student traveling to US, just because of the economic differences. Right? So conducting these conferences in different places, also rotating them and across different countries, just so that even if people don't have the resources to travel, they can at least be provided by a network of scientists from across the world to network with.
Can I ask Amos a question? Because these things, well, what we've been talking lately has been more like minorities, Western world, culture clashes. Whereas maybe like what Amos was saying is different ethnicities within Nigeria, right? So are these conversations happening about ethnicity, like basically our question today, the role that ethnicity plays in academia? Do people discuss these things, or is it just people experiencing these silently?
Well, it's not really being discussed on a daily basis. Some experience it silently, while the government tried making things inclusive in a way where they give preference to those ethnic groups that haven't gone that far in academic career. They call it a catchment system, where they give a certain ethnic group more preference in admitting them into the tertiary institution. And it has its own strengths and it has its own weaknesses, because there are some people with good grades but can't make it to the higher institution because preference is being given to those who don't have many people in such field.
If I can just ask a question from the chat, because we only have 10 minutes left. And someone on YouTube, Virendra Mathur, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, is saying the academia in the West, which is touted as the dream to a lot of students in the East, has various barriers for habitat country scientists. What does the panelists think of the visa regulations for conferences and networking panels, which is difficult to obtain for a lot of habitat country researchers? Academia does talk about moving the conferences out of the West and to other countries too, but what is the infrastructure development that they are ready to bring in? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I could maybe quickly share my experience with one of the visa things, because this was quite surprising to me. So when I was in India doing my PhD, getting a US visa to go to a conference was always an issue, because the few centers and then the very few slots, and you have to watch out. And I think the problem is even worse now, because the I guess the fewer people manning the agencies, and then the long waiting list to get a visa to just go for the conference, right? And then I shifted to my postdoc to Switzerland, and here I got the chance to go to another conference in the US, and I was like, okay, I can apply for the visa. And because I was here, I could apply for the visa here, and it just took me one day. I booked the thing like a few weeks in advance. I go there, I submit it, and it's done. They barely check anything. And I think in India, you need a whole list of like bank resources, like how much money do you have, all your transcripts. And I took all these documents here, right, in the US embassy in Switzerland, and they didn't care for anything. They just wanted your invitation letter, and they just gave me a visa. And to me, that was quite shocking. And when I discussed this with a few friends back in India, and they were, I mean, it's a huge difference in how the process is done. And it is quite surprising. And I guess this is not something. I mean, this is systematic. This is a quite systematic change. Right? It's not something we can do much about. I just wanted to highlight that.
Just want to add to that even if you do get the opportunity to go, I think at border control it can be quite an unnerving experience. so I mean, people at border control are already stern and they tend to be quite like not friendly. I don't know if that's just my experience, but that's how I've always seen it. And then when I went to the US in the summer, then that's where I had that weird experience that I mentioned earlier. And then when I told someone that organized the conference, then they said, oh, we should have issued a letter just so that, you know, you don't get harassed. Then there is a statement, there's an official letter that says, oh, this person is here for a conference. Yeah, just a little comment.
But do you think this letter would be useful? That's something organizers should do then?
So I think the way the person at the border control responded to me and not my colleague that I was with, who's white, changed after we explained that we were here for the conference and we were scientists, and maybe after he heard my accent. So I don't know if a letter would have just saved me that emotional like turmoil that I had to go through for those few minutes if I just like gave them the letter and they could like spend time reading it themselves and then hold back their judgment, even though it shouldn't be like that. Just because I'm a researcher, I'm going to some fancy conference, you know, shouldn't make it less likely for someone to treat me a certain way. But I don't know. Well, I mean, there was also this workshop at this conference where it was called like safety in the field. And I thought, okay, let's see what this is about. And everyone that attended, the majority were females, and the few men that were there were of ethnic minorities. And it just made me wonder, why did it attract these, why did it attract this demographic? And then during the workshop, I didn't feel like there was any real practical solution. Like there was nothing that I felt like, okay, these are some practical things that I can do to feel safer in the field. And so I feel like this letter is also something, I don't know how much impact it really has. So there is definitely this, I was really surprised and I was somewhat glad, positive that these conversations are happening and people are starting to make an effort. But I think the solutions are not quite there yet. And I don't have the answer to that either at the moment.
Do you guys think that moving the conferences to the West could be a solution? In-person conferences, of course. No, not to the West, sorry, to the East. I'm so sorry.
I think it could be like a huge step to remove some of the barriers and attract a different demography of scientists. And not just the East, but also the global South. Just not fixing it in a certain place, but having it move places every time to target different demography. It could really help. And I think a part of the question was about the infrastructure. And I would I would suspect that it would be cheaper to develop any infrastructure in these countries for the Western organizers, if that's the case. And it shouldn't be that big an issue or a barrier for them. And I think the cost of the conference might even be lower in these countries.
Udita, I'll be happy to have this conference shift down to Africa before India.
Definitely.
Actually, is even for people in the West, is expensive to go to certain conferences. So this one that I went to in the summer was in California, and it's really expensive. Just California itself, even if we're in the UK, it's expensive to fly there. It's expensive to get your food there. So I would, like, if we were to go to Africa or like Asian countries or anywhere, like for the Western world, it'll be cheaper. I mean, the flights would probably be more or less the same compared to like America, Europe. And even within the US, you probably have to fly across the country and it's expensive. Whereas if the West goes to the East or the South, wherever, then the flights might be similar, but the cost itself will be much lower. And I mean, the weather will be nicer, most likely. You can sit even outdoors. I did a workshop in like a rainforest in Sri Lanka, and then the class was just outside. We just had chairs outside. Like that doesn't take much money and is more enjoyable. So, okay, if it's going to rain, then maybe we can put a hut, whatever. It's totally doable. We don't need these like fancy, massive halls that are super air conditioned, that everyone just like freezes inside and then like boils outside. You know? It's not necessary, I say.
And I think it might also help spread cultural awareness from other places, and just the sense of like maybe the white superiority or supremacy in academia in general, that might just help that cause a little if the conferences are not always held in those places, that it's easy access for certain ethnicities.
I would like to close this roundtable by one last question. Oh, Alexi Beato has a question in the chat. Without talking about moving conferences to the east, since it doesn't remove the issue of CO2 emission, do you think online solutions such as ABL could help? A little bit of self-promotion here. So do you think online conferences are a solution to this problem?
I think they can be part of the solution. And it probably, as Evie was mentioning, it probably broadens the audience that can attend, and it gives a certain feeling of anonymity that can help people interact. There's still another like social component of person-in-person interactions. So giving the chance of choosing whether you want to do it in person or virtual, I think it's it's one of the things that COVID really helped us realize, that we can actually do these interactions virtually. So I do think it could be part of the solution.
I think one other issue might be access to good connection. And it might seem like it's normal for everyone, but I have worked in Madagascar before, and I'm trying to collaborate there right now. And just it's really difficult for people there to have a good connection for even a simple call. So it might be part of the solution, but maybe it has to be a mix of moving the conferences around and also having online versions, which a lot of conferences these days are doing, like the hybrid format, which is great.
Yes, it could be a solution, because I was privileged to attend a conference online, which I couldn't have if it wasn't online. And but having conferences holding online limits the level of exposure of people. It's possible to have Natasha over here in Africa. She sees some challenges and she decides to probably raise a foundation for probably, let's say, a charity organization that will help hotel such challenges. So it limits exposure, in my own opinion. It can be on site, moving those conferences to different parts of the world and having it online, but who still can't afford the internet and the traveling expense.
Abby, maybe you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say I know a few societies were trying these different models where they have satellite conferences. So the idea is that there's a main conference that happens at one place over a few days, and at the same time the regional versions of the same in different parts of the world, so that people can locally go to the where it's happening, the satellite hub closest to them. It's sort of, I mean, it doesn't, it's also another way to look at it. Like this way that there's less travel involved and you can attend the conference, but you're definitely not meeting with the whole group. So there's still, I mean, you are maybe going up one level of diversity, but not getting the whole experience in some sense. But it's also an interesting way to think about when, you know, organizers are thinking about conferences. And maybe even so, I guess a little bit of the issue is that since these have been happening in the West for a while, you need contacts to, or you need some local hosts to, you know, organize the whole thing, right? And that means that they need to have the administrative and financial resources to do it. Maybe this could be a step forward, you know, get people trained to trained to organize these small satellite conferences associated with the main one, and that gives them the ability to know what is involved, what sort of resources are required, what infrastructure is required before scaling it up fully to have conferences moved around completely. I feel that a sudden shift is definitely not going to happen, and small steps are required before we can actually say that we have conferences that happen across the globe.
So I think our time is up. I would like to thank everyone at this roundtable for sharing your personal experience. I feel like we could speak about it for hours because there is so much to speak about. Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe I would like to conclude with an extract from Kueli's Dot Papers, where she talks about the role of white people and how they can be allies. So here it is. We need a systemic cultural change that can only happen when people are not willing to acknowledge the problem, but also to take individual responsibility for it. The only way we can change the science culture is by a massive shift in individual mindsets, with the aim of moving the field from passively non-racist to actively anti-racist. That's something I strongly believe in. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.